All right, good afternoon. My name is Christopher Cahill, 12 Points Wealth Management. Thank you for joining us for our Gifting and Philanthropy Trends in 2020 and Beyond presentation that we're going to be starting here in just a moment. There's a couple of more attendees scheduled and rolling through, so we're just going to give you another moment before we get going. So bear with us for 1 second and we'll be right back. All right, so in the interest of time and being sensitive to those of you that are on the calendar here or on the webinar here with us today, we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you again for joining. My name is Christopher Cahill, and I am a partner at 12 Points Wealth Management in Concord, Massachusetts, attorney, certified financial planner, and a chartered advisor in philanthropy. I've been in the financial services industry for over 20 years, and I specialize in working with lawyers, law firms, business owners, and other affluent individuals. My expertise centered around estate and trust, financial planning, philanthropic planning, business succession, and portfolio management really crystallizes into this conversation about philanthropy. It's something I'm really excited to be speaking today with you about and speaking with my good friend, Rick Peck from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. So Rick, why don't you give us a quick overview of yourself, your background?
Sure. Thanks very much, Chris. I really appreciate being here today. So like Chris, I am a CFP, and I'm also a chartered advisor in philanthropy. I'm with the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. I'm the Vice President for Development and Philanthropy Services. Prior to my world in development, I was a financial advisor with American Express. I did that for 7 years, and that's been a really interesting background to have been doing retirement planning, education planning, insurance planning, as a precursor to 15 years in the development world. So I went right into, from American Express, right into Dartmouth College, worked in that field, healthcare industry as well. And then about 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, I started here at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. So had great experience with large nonprofits, but now I look at it as my job is to try to bring in as much money as possible through the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation for the benefit of all these nonprofits out there. So maybe just a quick just highlights of New Hampshire Charitable Foundation just for context for all of you on the call.
Sure, please.
Yeah, so we are considered a large community foundation. We're the second largest community foundation in New England outside of the Boston Foundation, and we're the 32nd largest community foundation in the country out of about 800. And that equates to about $826 million in assets. We've been around for almost 60 years. Last year, we took in about $46 million of new money, and about 2/3 of that came from existing donors, and 1/3 of it came from brand new donors. And then we put out about $47 million of grants into the community. 73% of that stayed in New Hampshire, and the other 27% went to entities outside of New Hampshire. So in that way, you can see that we serve New Hampshire for the most part, but we're eligible to make grants out and to receive dollars from people from anywhere in the country. So that's just a little background for you as far as the foundation itself, and we'll get into some more of the details as we go.
Excellent. Thanks, Rick. Really appreciate it. So here are the topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the CARES Act, recent legislation that has an impact on philanthropy and giving. We're going to speak about the Secure Act as well, legislation from the end of 2019, been a little bit eclipsed from the old pandemic that we're dealing with here. We're going to speak about gifts of non-cash assets. We're then going to spend time talking about donor-advised fund, community foundation, donor-advised funds, advisor-managed options, and Community Foundation 101, and also a couple of other topics, the impact of giving, how we can be impactful, how we can track that, and also some tax strategies and the impact of potential tax law changes as it relates to philanthropy. So we've got a lot to cover here today. We are going to try to get through it as quickly as we can. We like to be in and out of these things in, a half hour, 35, 40 minutes, but we'll take the time that we need. And by all means, If you have questions, just simply post them on the chat, and we'll do our best to pay attention to that and answer them. And if not, you can always follow up with us afterwards. We're happy to chat with you about any and all of these topics. So without further ado, Rick, let's talk about the CARES Act.
Sure. So the CARES Act, you can see just from the slides here, signed into law in late March. So made some changes, not hugely dramatic changes, but enough to mention today regarding charitable deductions for individuals and businesses, trying to encourage charitable giving during this very challenging time. So just buzzing through some of the highlights. So all taxpayers can deduct up to $300 in cash contributions to nonprofits in 2020, regardless of whether or not they itemize deductions. So not a lot, $300, but it might be just enough to incentivize some people to give. And then you can see in the last bullet there, the law lifts the existing annual cap on cash contributions for those who itemize from 60% of adjusted gross income to 100%. So that hopefully is an incentive. Yeah, it can be very, very big for those who itemize and want to take advantage of that. So
and
those are just
the threshold. What's the threshold again on that, Rick, for those that are itemizing, those that aren't, just so that we're grounded on that?
60% normally is cash contributions, 60% of adjusted gross income, and it's now all the way up to 100%.
Got it. Excellent. And as we continue on here, a little bit more with the CARES Act. Yeah.
So for corporations, the law now raises the annual contribution limit from 10% of taxable income to 25%. Again, try to incentivize corporations. This is a little bit of an unusual bullet point, but corporations may now deduct up to 25% of taxable income in food donations. That's up from 15%. So food insecurity is out there. So that hopefully, and it's obviously something that people care about. So for corporations who care about that, that's an incentive for them. And then just important, these changes that we're talking about apply to cash gifts to public charities, and they don't actually apply to donor advised funds, supporting organizations, or private foundations. But there are types of funds that we might be able to get into a little bit later at community foundations that it does apply to. So, and then the last bullet here, just suspending required minimum distributions on IRAs and qualified plans for 2020. That's good, but, and we may get into this a little bit later, but you can use qualified charitable distributions to still move money out of those if you want to help with charitable giving during this troubling time. Even though you don't have to make a required minimum distribution, you're still allowed up to $100,000 from an IRA directly to nonprofits if you want to do that.
And that's that qualified charitable distribution that you just referenced, right?
Yes, exactly. It's also known as a QCD. And people, again, not that they have to, but sometimes people say, well, I still have a lot of money in my IRA. It's a natural place for me to grab money from if I want to make a charitable contribution, and why not? Because eventually somebody's going to probably be taxed on that money, so you might as well use it now when the need is so great.
Absolutely. And the need is great. So we're going to pivot here and talk about the Secure Act. So the Secure Act, setting every community up for retirement enhancement, was passed in December of 2019. I would submit to you that had the pandemic not come past, this would be on everyone's mind right now, because it is a huge impact for wealthy individuals and the beneficiaries of those wealthy individuals. So what the Secure Act does, in essence, is provide some incentives to corporations to provide more retirement funding to their participants, easier access to setting up accounts, making it cheaper, so on and so forth. But the costs are borne on the backs of wealthy individuals with significant IRAs and 401ks, and those costs are recouped through the acceleration of payments out of these tax-deferred retirement accounts. So let's take a look at this a little bit further. So as we were just talking about RMDs, the required minimum distributions, Rick just indicated that that's been postponed for 2020 through the CARES Act. The Secure Act changed that ever popular date of 70 and a half to age 72. So those of you that are approaching that RMD stage know that when the RMDs come back on next year, you only have to start taking them at age 72, not at 70 and a half anymore. But so there was certainly some good benefits as it relates to the Secure Act for people that are currently working and trying to save, and corporations that are trying to set up 401ks for their participants. But it's really, really expensive. So again, how is it paid for? It's paid for by wealthy individuals. I always like to remind folks that the federal government and the state governments are your silent partners in your retirement accounts. So, if you have a large IRA, assume whatever your effective tax bracket is, that's kind of the government's clip on that they're going to take at some point in the near future. Well, not near, hopefully, but in the future. So how did they do that? And how do they do that? Through the death of the stretch IRA. The stretch IRA was one of the most powerful planning tools that we had as planners, right, Rick? I mean, you've been doing stretch IRAs with individuals for years, just as I have.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Very
really
popular.
important.
I mean, it's great, to stretch that tax burden out for a lifetime.
That's exactly right, and over multiple lifetimes. So what the stretch really refers to is taking the IRA. So let's say Dad had a big IRA. He can take the distributions over his lifetime, leave it to his spouse, who would then take those distributions over her lifetime, and then when she passes, leaving it to the children, they get to take it over their lifetime. So you got that tax deferral over, in many instances, 40, 50, 60 years. Could be even greater if you named grandkids instead of the children. So a really powerful planning technique and tool of continuing that tax deferred growth, all the while along providing an income stream to those beneficiaries. What the Secure Act did, however, is it really truncated that. And so now what we have is husband to wife, wife to children, or grandchildren as the case may be, but it's a 10-year withdrawal requirement. So it really truncates it, shortens it, and creates this loss of tax deferment that we see here in that highlighted area. So it's a real big impact to wealthy individuals. It's something that you certainly want to be talking to a qualified planner on, and whether it's at your own level for what you're considering passing down to your heirs, or in many instances, we're talking with our clients about potential inheritances that they may receive from their parents or grandparents who are above them. So significant impacts potentially. There are some ways to deal with it. So these things we're going to chat about them here. Roth conversions, charitable remainder trusts, and a zero estate tax plan. So the Roth conversion is one of the preferred manners of dealing with the impact of a lack of a stretch IRA, because once you have a Roth, there's no required minimum distribution. So the heirs you can continue to grow that asset tax-free, and then it comes out to the heirs tax-free over their time period. So there's no accelerated tax hit there. A CRT, we're going to look at that in a moment, and the zero estate tax plan as well. So in each instance, life insurance is a really great solution for those of you that are philanthropically inclined, that have large qualified plans or IRAs. One way to provide certainty of result would be to do that zero estate tax plan that we just discussed a moment ago. That would, in essence, have you leave all of your assets that are subject to tax to charity, a community foundation like the New Hampshire Community Foundation, to a donor advised fund that you might set up either at a community foundation or at another institution, whether it's Charles Schwab, Fidelity, or someplace like that, or direct to a charity that you care about. It could even be a family foundation that you chose to set up. In that instance, the assets would go to charity, and then you'd buy an insurance policy outside of the taxable estate in a trust that would provide an inheritance to the children. So most estate tax plans kind of look like this. Mom and dad have assets. They go through what we call the tax funnel and get down to the kids. The Secure Act here provides that zero estate tax plan that we just discussed. So, Rick, how much of what you guys are doing right now do you see coming from IRAs or annuities or things that have, embedded income taxation on it?
We actually have quite a decent amount of IRAs coming to us as bequests. In fact, we just did a look back, and we found that 20% of our income each year comes from bequests, comes from outside estates. So,
Wow.
So anything regarding anything that's taxable is a natural thing to send our way. And so, yeah, and as far as annuities, yep, we do see annuities set up through us. When they terminate, all that money goes to the nonprofit. And during someone's lifetime, they're usually receiving a quarterly stream of income from that charitable gift annuity. So, but anyway, all these things can be, and as we just mentioned, charitable remainder trusts, all of these things can be helpful as a way to not only receive a stream of income in some cases, but also to save money on taxes.
Excellent. So let's take a look at what that might look like here. So graphically, some people are visual, some people are more textual. A picture is worth 1,000 words from my perspective. So as you'll recall, that last graphic that we had with the husband and wife passing assets through the tax funnel, an advanced planning strategy utilizing charity and life insurance would look like this. The husband could leave his IRA to his spouse, and then at her passing, she could name a community foundation, a donor advised fund, family foundation, whatever the case may be, as the beneficiary. So those assets now pass over to the left on this screen, out of the tax funnel, meaning they're no longer going to the children. They're not going to be subject to income or capital gains or estate tax. Mom and dad could then make annual gifts to a trust that could be utilized to buy life insurance. Those proceeds at the second passing would be there for the children and grandchildren, estate tax, capital gains tax, and income tax free. Really a cool strategy. So how much are you seeing in the way as it really, I mean, I know that charitable remainder trusts are a huge tool in your toolbox, Rick. Let's talk about it as it relates to the Secure Act here. Tell me how this would work and what your views on the subject are.
Yeah, so with that 10-year termination, after the end of 10 years, something must happen. It's a good idea to say, well, how else could I give my loved one a stream of income? So the testamentary charitable remainder trust or testamentary charitable gift annuity is the concept of just simply taking that money, that IRA money, and dumping it into a charitable remainder trust only at someone's passing, or charitable gift annuity only at someone's passing, and then turning on the spigot and allowing for a quarterly stream of income to continue. So obviously, if somebody has charitable intent, it's a natural thing to consider. And then with the charitable gift annuity or a charitable remainder trust, it continues on for someone's lifetime if that's what someone wants to do. With the charitable remainder trust, you could also put it for a period of years. It could be 10 years, it could be a certain term. But most people, if they're trying to substitute out what the old version of the IRA looked like, they're going to want it to be for someone's lifetime. So we do run illustrations for people to show them what a charitable remainder trust might look like if someone died at a certain age, and what the beneficiary would receive, what that payout would look like, and so on. And the same with the charitable gift annuity. It's just a hypothetical because obviously we don't know when someone's going to pass away, but it can be a good guidepost for someone who's considering something like that. Can run an illustration to show them what that might look like.
Excellent. No, that's a great overview. Thank you. And again, the graphic here depicts that, I think, pretty well. So in this instance, the IRA would go to a charitable remainder trust at the second passing, providing that income stream down to the children or potentially the grandchildren, and the remainder passing to charity. So that income stream presumably represents that or replicates that loss of income through the Secure Act. And again, you can add in the life insurance on this or not, as the case may be. To be clear, you do not need to use insurance in these situations. They're beneficial and helpful, and if you're looking to provide certainty of result, they definitely provide that. So now we're going to take a look at that qualified charitable distribution. Let's talk about that a little bit further, Rick, because that's something that I know people are really interested in.
Sure. So we mentioned that we don't have to take required minimum distributions from an IRA this year, and that in future years it'll be moved back to age 72 from age 70 and a half. But what still exists, if people want to choose to tap into this, is they can take up to $100,000 from an IRA and move it to their favorite charity or charities without it affecting their taxable income. So that just means they can just send it directly over, and that has many positive attributes if somebody wants to do that. Now, the second bullet is very important. It says donor advised funds are not allowed, but you can use other types of funds or give directly to the nonprofit. I just want to put a special accent on the fact that although donor advised funds can't be used at community foundations like ours, there are at least 4 other types of funds that someone could consider to move the money into. If they don't want to give it directly to charity right away, their favorite nonprofits right away, they want to give it to a charity like us, but they want to put it into some sort of an endowment type of a fund. They can do that. So they can sidestep a donor advised fund and choose at least 4 other types of funds. So that's important, because sometimes people throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, if I can't put the QCD money into the donor advised fund, forget it. It's like, well, you can't do it into a donor advised fund, but you can choose other choices. So, and people normally would say, as we were just talking about with R&D, sometimes they take what they think they would have taken in a required minimum distribution and use that as a guide to send over, or they can say, no, I want to have $100,000 from my IRA, and I want to take $100,000 from my spouse's IRA. We want to go all in and put $200,000 to our favorite nonprofits this year, just because the need is so great. So it's a really terrific source. It's been around, I want to say, since 2006 in fits and starts. It was temporary for a while, and then eventually became permanent. And so the nonprofits like that, because they don't have to go back around December 20th and say, do we have to make this retroactive? Now it's permanent, and so we just can count on that every single year, and people can use that as part of their charitable planning.
No, it's really great strategy, and one that our wealthy clients rely upon for certain. So we're going to touch briefly here on the Roth conversion again. So walk us through what a Roth conversion would do and why you would want to offset it with a charitable gift.
So we will sometimes run a slide that shows what it would look like to take a traditional IRA, all pre-tax, and then convert it either all in 1 year or all in the course of 2 years, or maybe in the course of 3 years. And by doing so, what the taxation would be and how you can offset that with a charitable gift, either an outright gift or another type of gift, like we were mentioning other things like gift annuities. So the idea is just to take the bite out of the conversion, because you're going to have to pay those taxes. So if you have to pay the taxes, which is going to be great for your Roth IRA in the future, because all that future stream of income will be tax-free, you have to pay the piper and pay those taxes now. So a charitable gift can be a way to help take the sting out of that. So like I said, it can be an outright gift. It can be a form of other types of gifts to offset that taxation.
Excellent. And speaking of other types of gifts, let's talk about these for a second. So, many people, the majority of gifts still come in the form of cash, right? I mean, that's, checkbook giving is tried and true in the United States, and it's what many people defer to and like. It's what they're comfortable with. There are benefits, however, of utilizing other assets. They include, appreciated publicly traded stocks, for instance, often overlooked. So if you have, particular concentration in a stock that's run up, take a look at that. That could provide a really great strategy for giving, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Closely held stock, business interests, real estate, life insurance, tangible personal property. These are topics that are important, and assets that can be given and are oftentimes overlooked. So let's look at the most obvious one that many people have, right? So you have an appreciated stock, say, that's grown significantly. In this instance here, what you want to do is make a contribution of that stock to charitable organization in kind. It moves from your custodian, from your account into wherever it's going, a community foundation, donor advised fund, etc. The reason that you would do that is that you're going to be able to get the fair market value of the asset out of your estate and over to the nonprofit. They're going to get the ability to have the full value of that asset. You're going to save the income tax on the transaction. You're not going to pay capital gains tax, and the net result, the cost of that gift for you is going to be a lot less. So how does that work? So assume we have this donor here that's in a 28% bracket and considering a contribution of $10,000 in either cash or securities with a $2,000 basis and an $8,000 gain. What we see when we run it through here is the $10,000 of cash. You'd save, income taxes on that of $2,800. So you'd have an after-tax cost of that gift of $7,200, which is great. But if, on the other hand, you had that same $10,000 and it was the appreciated stock, you'd also be saving $1,200 in capital gains tax. So the cost after tax to you of that transaction would be $6,000. So you'd be moving 10 for a cost of 6. That's good leverage. That's good planning. And organizations like the Community Foundation of New Hampshire, I'm sure, get significant contributions every year in the form of appreciated stock, right?
Well, yes, but I have to say that it's as you said before, it's often overlooked. And I should say this just as put a fine point on it. People are often solicited for cash. If you think about it, a lot of the times people are asking you for lower dollar cash gifts. That's what is being solicited. But the reality is that people are presented with a multitude of non-cash options to give, they will consider that. There's been research done that shows if people know that they can take something that's illiquid, that is highly appreciated, and they can donate it because otherwise they're going to have to sell it and incur those capital gains. If they know there's another choice, they will take that. So I just want to put an accent on that. It's not like you're twisting people's arms to choose something other than cash. They appreciate, they like to know that there is something else out there that they might consider. And because of that, it might be a much more significant gift. It might be something that is monumental for these nonprofits, where normally you get $1,000, they might get $500,000 because of a combination of non-cash gifts. So yes, going back to your question, Chris, the appreciated securities, that continues to grow in popularity, but it's not like we're stopping the advertising of such things, because we want to make sure that every single year throughout the year, we let people know non-cash gifts are something we are open to receiving.
Absolutely. And, we see it a lot with our business owners that we work with, right? In an ideal situation, we'd be introduced to somebody or work with somebody for many years before they had a liquidity event or sold their business. But for those folks that are approaching or contemplating that over the next, several years, by all means, reach out to us. If you're philanthropically inclined, the opportunity to make a huge impact for a cause that you care about, and also as a way to reduce your personal income taxation on the transaction, is really wonderful. So, that's the sort of thing that with proper planning and a little bit of work up front, moving some of that asset out of your estate and into an appropriate vehicle, you can, again, capture an income tax deduction on the movement of the asset. You can avoid a capital gains a capital gains tax on the sale of that asset. And then that pool of assets is there to fund your future philanthropy. It's just a huge win for all of the parties concerned. But it's amazing to me how often it's overlooked when we're introduced to people that have sold their business or are selling their business and find that they haven't had any conversations with their previous advisors relative to this topic. So it's something that I think is just really important. And the same can be said for real estate, et cetera, and other assets, whether it's, a Monet or a Andy Warhol painting, whatever the case may be. If it's got value, it can be given away. So moving forward here, Let's talk about these donor advised funds a little bit further. Why don't you explain what a donor advised fund is at the broad brush for us here, Rick, and then we'll get into more specifics.
Sure. A donor advised fund is a very nimble, easy to set up vehicle that's an alternative to a private foundation in many situations. And it's an alternative to making a gift to your favorite nonprofits now. So the idea would be to take cash or non-cash, as we just talked about, set up something either online or in person. You just set up the donor advised fund, establish it, and you get to, you're eligible to take the tax deduction now. So the idea is I get to decide later, as it says in the third bullet, decide later which charities I want to support through my donor advised fund, but I get to take the tax deduction now. So you decouple those two decisions. And then again, the foundation, private foundation can be very costly. There's a lot of work that goes involved into setting up a private foundation. It tends to be the go-to thought for people who want to do something like that, but the donor advised fund is so much more stripped down and simplified. And just talk about options. There's a commercial donor advised fund, which is Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard. Those are simple to set up, usually online. You can have a whole slew of investment choices, and it's pretty nice. But in the case of a community foundation, you get advice. You get not only to set up that donor advised fund, but you get somebody to help you deploy those assets. So that's important, especially if you consider it Fidelity. The threshold is $3 million. Excuse me. So $3 million is where people can start to receive advice, and anything less than $3 million, they are not. So that's just reinforcing, what are you looking for? Are you looking for something very low cost with no advice? Or are you looking for something maybe a little bit of a slightly higher cost, but you get somebody to kind of guide you through your decisions? The bunching bundling concept, that's where you say, for example, maybe in my normal pattern of giving, under the current tax law, for a married couple, it would be $24,000 as the exempt at the level in which you can start to itemize your charitable contribution. So anything less than $24,000, you can't. So bunching and bundling works like this. Maybe you say, I have $40,000 worth of contributions I want to make in one given year. Well, then I'll be able to take anything over $24,000 and add that to my charitable income tax deductions for the year. And again, as I mentioned before, decoupling, so you're eligible for that tax deduction, but then you could consider continuing to make annual contributions to your favorite nonprofits from inside of the donor advised fund. So every other year, maybe every 3 years, you make a bigger gift into your donor advised fund to try to capture that extra tax deduction, all the while considering making the same level of deployment of grants to your favorite nonprofits, so they don't feel the bump. They're not waiting for a gift from you every 2 or 3 years. They're still getting their annual disbursement. Also, donor advised funds, this is really important. There is no required annual payout versus a private foundation mandates 5% goes out each and every year. So people can be a little bit more on their own track. Maybe they'll take a year off and not make contributions to their favorite nonprofits, or maybe they put out 20% of the principal of their donor advised fund in one given year. That's up to you as an individual. Some institutions like you to have some sort of a pattern. They don't want you to hoard the money in their donor advised fund and not spend it at all. But if there's some sort of pattern that you're following, that's important. And then the last thing I'll mention is anonymity. Private foundations, a 990 is filed. That's public information. What people can see where you're deploying your grants. With donor advised fund, you can be anonymous. No one can know how you're deploying your grants. You can make the name of the donor advised fund completely anonymous, and again, use it like your own family's family foundation, but without the exposure that you would get by filing the 990 tax form.
And that's a huge part for many of our clients. They want to give. They're not looking for accolades and attaboys. They're just really looking to make an impact. And at the same time, they're not looking to be solicited unnecessarily either. So the anonymity is really, really huge. let's just touch on this. So advisor managed staffs, let's spend a second on that, and then we'll pivot through to community foundations.
Sure. This was created at the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation because of the fact that advisors, of course, would love to help their clients be philanthropic, but they'd like to continue to manage those assets. So about 5.5 years ago, we created the advisor managed donor advised fund option, where the wealth advisor can manage the donor advised fund on behalf of the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, and the client's perfectly happy because they get the combination of their favorite advisor managing the assets, getting paid on them, as well as the community foundation who continues to give them advice. So the testamentary version is surprisingly popular. People want to make sure that their favorite advisor manages their charitable assets long after they're gone. We saw a lot of that this year, people requesting that. And again, the community foundation does all the heavy lifting as far as grants, administration, and the wealth advisor just continues to get paid and manage it. And then the idea in the fourth bullet, the non-cash asset discussions, maybe the wealth advisor is more prone to looking beyond and saying, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Client, what do you think about this asset? Do you have capital gains on that? Would you ever consider donating that? And then if it's donated to the donor advised fund, we can then liquidate it and put it into the advisor managed option for the wealth advisor to manage.
Gotta love that, says the wealth manager. Let's take a minute here and talk about community foundations a little bit further, and then we're going to touch on the impact and some potential tax saving strategies or changes as it relates to taxes. So take us through community foundations real quick, Rick.
Sure. So I mentioned earlier 6 funds, or well, there's the donor advised fund, which is by far our most popular type of fund. But then I'll just buzz through some really, from some other types of funds that might be interesting. Scholarship funds, that's a second type of fund at a community foundation, always a need for scholarship, both for second and 2 and 4 year college students, as well as the trades. That's something that's also overlooked, that there's lots of scholarship for trades. There's also something called a field of interest fund, and that is where someone chooses a geography or a subject that they want to focus in on without choosing a specific nonprofit to fund. And then the foundation staff decides each and every year where those dollars go within that particular theme or that field of interest. There's also what's called a designated fund. That's the opposite. That's where somebody says, I know exactly the nonprofit I want to support, and I would like to choose my designated fund to support that nonprofit or other types of nonprofits. Then there's something called an agency fund, which is set up by a nonprofit to benefit itself. It works like a designated fund in that there's an annual payout, but the annual payout goes back to the agency or the nonprofit, so that maybe they like to keep an arm's length between the donations they receive and whoever is investing and administering those. So those are about over 10% of the funds we have at the foundation are agency funds. So a lot of nonprofits take advantage of that. And then the last fund I'll mention is called an unrestricted fund. So that's just where somebody says, you know what, I don't know, I have no idea where I want to deploy these assets to. I'll just trust that the community foundation staff will be able to administer and deploy those assets where the need is the greatest. So those are rare, but when they come in, they're usually pretty big, and they're a godsend to the community foundation staff. Investment pool choices, we have 5. I mentioned one already, the advisor managed option. The other 4 are in-house, very much like mutual funds. So there's broad, highly diversified, global types of funds, and then there's socially screened. And then there's ones called an impact investing pool, where it's hyper local to New Hampshire or the Northeast. And so people can choose those based on their values, based on what's important to them. They can choose one or more, so that's nice. As I've mentioned throughout, community foundations have local impact. We have topic experts on substance use disorders or the environment or whatever is of interest to your client. We probably have somebody on staff who can help guide them toward whatever is important to them in that particular category. Family philanthropy is where a first generation makes the money, is philanthropic, but maybe there's a concern that the second generation or even the third generation doesn't necessarily hold those same values or really understand what philanthropy is. So the idea behind offering that up as a community foundation can bridge the gap a little bit. That's not to say that the second generation and third generation have to do exactly what mom and dad did or grandma and grandpa did. But it's good to have the conversation to say, maybe there's room for expansion. Maybe the second and third generation can carry on the legacy of giving in a different way. And then last 2 points, larger community foundations are very sophisticated. We take in all kinds of non-cash gifts. We have lots of different nonprofit relationships that we can package up and curate and say, here, Mr. and Mrs. Client, you said you're interested in the environment, in education, and in animals. Well, here are some choices for you that you can consider based on the research and the relationships that we have. And then the last point, connections to other community foundations across the country. I can't say enough how tight we are, even though they're over in Houston or San Diego or the Carolinas or Atlanta. I have peers in other community foundations across the country that I'm always reaching out to, and we help each other out. And I think that can be of great value to a client who is looking for that connectivity across the United States, where great things are happening in other parts of the country that they might not otherwise be able to know about had it not been for the fact that the community foundations can share that information for the benefit of the client.
Great point, great point. So we're a little bit over time here, but I did want to touch on a couple of quick topics at the end. So Rick, I know that many of the people that we work with, and that I'm sure you do as well, are really fixated on and focused on the impact, making sure that their gifts have meaning. What are you seeing in that world today? How do you help people think through that? And then we'll just wrap up, I think, because we're a little bit over time here.
Sure. Impact is really just people wanting to make sure that they're not throwing good money after bad. And so a lot of times people just put money out into the community, cross their fingers, hope that they're doing good work. But I think it's the iterative process of giving. It's to say, I think this is what I want to do, but let's just check with the community foundation and see what they think. And that's when we go back to them and say, these are not our dollars, these are your dollars, but if we were to spend your dollars according to what your wishes are, here's what we would suggest. And then what happens is many times the individual can see, oh, my $5,000 did this or my $10,000 did this. Yeah, I definitely want to give back to them again next year. Or I'll just go back to the community foundation and say, what else do you have? What other things am I not considering out there that seem like it's going to be money well placed? So that's, you can get very close to very sophisticated clients and donors who are thinking about these things, but never really sure if what they're doing is impactful as they want it to be. So in that way, I think it can be very rewarding for people.
Great stuff, great stuff. Rick, thank you so much for your time today. Up on the screen right now, you'll see Rick's contact information, and you'll see mine as well. And know that we're here to answer and address any and all additional questions that you may have for us. We're 45 minutes into this presentation today. We wanted to thank you all for joining. And Rick, I personally wanted to say thanks again for taking the time to assist with the development of these slides and prepare for this with me. It's a great honor for me to be working with you on this, and I look forward to working with you for many, many years to come. So thanks so much, and wish you all a happy and healthy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, bye-bye.